welcome to Nelson All Over Cards. Today I have Villain Theory back on, and we are talking and starting a new series where we're going to be talking about deck building. How are you doing, Villain Theory?
I'm doing great, thanks. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming back on. You are the expert in deck building, and so we have kind of a series of videos to go through and talk about deck building in Marvel Champions. This first video is going to be focusing around the cost curve and what that means, and like where do you want your cost curve to be, and then that's going to set the foundation of our future videos going forward about resources and generators and all of this good stuff. Everything that you want to know about deck building, it all starts here. Before we get started, Villain Theory, can you give a quick shout out to who you are, where people can find you?
Yes. I'm VillainTheory. I'm most known for making decks. You can find that on marvelcdb.com. You occasionally see me elsewhere, Discord, Reddit. I'm lurking around. And that's me.
Excellent. Well, super happy to have you. And I'm really excited to talk to you about the cost curve. And because this is something that I have known about and kind of understood at a high level, but not necessarily known how to utilize these tools, and specifically like on Marvel CDB, the cost curve. But can you give a brief overview, or actually, no, not even a brief. What is the cost curve?
Okay, so depending on what game you're playing, cost curve can have different definitions. But the definition we're going with here is, if you come from a Magic the Gathering background, it'd be mana curve. It's the cost of your cards in your deck. Basically comes down to how many of what cost do you have, and if you were to put this into a graph, normally forms a kind of a curve, or it can be a zigzag. It can go up and down. It can be disjointed is the phrase. But how many zero costs, how many one costs, how many two costs, how many three costs, and so on. How does that affect your deck? How does that look in your deck?
And so right now in edit, I'm going to be adding a picture from Marvel CDB. So this is the website where a lot of people go to build Marvel Champions decks, and it gives you a lot of this data. And the card cost with the graph is specifically what we're going to be talking about in this video. And so hopefully, if I've done my job right, that is on the screen now, and that's what we're going to be talking about. And it's similar to the mana curve, but just going forward in all of the videos, we are going to settle on the terminology of cost curve and exactly what that means. But so let's talk about, is there an ideal cost curve? Is there something that you want to strive for when you are building your deck? And like, what would that look like?
I would say there is actually not an ideal cost curve. I think different heroes and different roles, different deck archetypes demand different things. Unlike some games, you start with a very small amount of resources and you will build up. In Marvel, you get your resource generators. You can have more to play with as the game goes on. A character like Ironheart will get a bigger hand size. But for the most part, it's not a drastic difference. You start with a hand size, and that's your foundation. And really, you can effectively play. A four cost card is considered expensive. You could potentially play one on your first turn.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's most important is you have combinations of cards. You're drawing combinations of cards that you can spend efficiently and use up your entire hand. There'll be times where even when you can do that, you might not want to, but that is kind of the goal to aim for, so that every resource is used. I think something interesting to point out is if your hero has a hand size of 5 and you don't spend one of those resources, that is 20% of your resources you haven't used for that turn.
And that's significant. Yeah,
yes, yeah.
It can be. The other way that I kind of look at it is, if you can't necessarily just play only 4 cost cards and win the game, and you can't necessarily play only just 0 cost cards and win the game. There's a healthy balance in there, and it's how much you need to be doing. Your higher cost cards are most often, cards that we're including in the deck have a higher impact than the lower cost cards, but you're only getting to play very few of them. And so understanding what your deck is trying to do, and I really liked what you said there with the archetypes of what the deck is trying to do, that determines the cost curve. It's not there's not a picture perfect cost curve for every single hero that you need. And I think that's a really important point for people to think about when they are building decks.
No, that's 100%. Something that was interesting, like trying to win the game with just 4 cost cards is really interesting. I would say every turn the game is asking you to it's asking you to do. The threat is going up each turn. The villain is attacking you or scheming each turn. You're getting an encounter card each turn. So the game is asking you to do different things. And a 4-cost card, for the most part, will only do one thing. So you'll be handling that thing really well, but you are going to need to mix it up. Um, so if I was to talk about like the absolute ideal cost curve, I would like to try to make the most powerful hero and deck. In an ideal world with infinite card possibilities, I might be looking at lower cost cards to be more flexible. But some of the highest cost cards are really impactful, as you say, um, and you'll want a balance to line things up. Yeah.
Yeah. And so one of the things that we were kind of discussing right before, and just because I'm curious about it, is there an ideal cost curve for an aspect? So like typically when I'm thinking of leadership, I think of leadership having more high cost cards because you have a lot of allies, you're running a lot of that. So is your cost curve going to be higher in leadership than it is in protection where you're playing a lot of like defensive hints? Or how does that work?
Um, Depending on what kind of deck you make, it will look different, but I don't think it's locked to the aspects. Decks with allies do tend to run, you're not going to be running a lot of 0 and 1 cost. You're going to tend to have, 2 to 4 cost cards, but that'll be the same for aggression with boot camp as leadership. It's more about what you're trying to do rather than what the actual aspect is. Again, protection will often have a lot of 0 to 1 cost defensive cards. But you can do similar when you're using your basic attack in aggression. Your basic power cards tend to be cheap, like skilled strike and mean swing, that kind of thing. So yeah.
Okay. And we'll talk about resources and how to pay for everything in our next video. But the cost curve, we have a couple of examples. The first one we're going to be looking at is Spider-Man from the core set, the original Peter Parker Spider-Man. And this is his cost curve. You can see it on the screen now. And it looks weird, right?
It is interesting. When people say cost curve, you'll think of like, oh, it'll go a smooth, or maybe it'll, but it can really be quite jagged. I think would be a good term for it. And a bit like I touched on before, I think what you're really aiming for, rather than looking for a smooth curve to pay, you're looking almost like different costs as pieces of a puzzle to bring together efficiently. So Spider-Man's is a little weird, but let's say you start the game with 6 cards. You could pay for a 4-cost card and a 0-cost, as an example. So that would be pieces that go together well. I guess he'd have his resource generator and alter ego as Peter Parker, but just looking at cards.
And real quick, I just want to break that down because I think that's important. Is we're talking about 6 cards, and let's talk about effective cost versus printed cost at this point, because that is important to think about, because anytime that you spend a card, that's part of the card's cost. And so I see this abbreviated a lot as like ER, or yeah, right? ER, effective resource. Yeah.
Yes.
So if you have a 3-cost card, the effective cost of that card is 4 because it's the 3 resources plus the card itself. And so that is something to be considerate of. If you have a 4-cost card in a hand of 6, you don't have 2 cards left over. You have 1 card left over. Is there anything else? We'll touch on that a little bit more in the resources and all of that. But I think that works to talk about here a little bit, what the effective cost of different cards are.
Yes, no, I mean, you basically covered it, effective resource cost, true cost, I've heard it called. It is really just what's the printed number in the corner plus 1, because, you got a 2-cost card, spend it, you've lost that card as well. It's, so that's something to trip, that something can sometimes trip people up,
Yeah.
But yeah, to talk about Spider-Man, even though his cost curve, as you're seeing there, it's going up, it's starting at 1 and going down. What I would say the average is really, as you're looking at puzzle pieces, the average tends to be more important. What can you put together to play your hand efficiently? So I would probably consider him. It's slightly lower, but generally I'd call him sort of a medium hero. You've got the big swinging web kicks, you're webbed up, that kind of thing. So that's roughly how I'd weigh Spider-Man up.
Okay, so he's right there in the medium, and just so everyone is clear, the graph on the screen right now is just his signature kit. Before we have added any cards into the deck, this is what the 15 cards, this is what the cost curve looks like. And so my next question to you, Villain, is when you're building the deck, and we kind of already touched on it, but I want to ask it again, is when you're building the deck, are you trying to maintain this type of cost curve? Are you looking to adjust the cost curve? Is that hero dependent? Is that archetype dependent? How does that work? What's going through your mind when you're building a deck?
I would say cost curve is very important at the beginning of the deck to look at, and it's something I will come back toward the end of the process and refine a bit. And it's kind of almost iterate toward that end, especially when in the future we cover resources. But the way I would look at it is you have multiple approaches. If you have a balanced hero, with a very balanced cost curve, you can kind of lean anyway. You kind of almost it's almost like if let's say you have a hero that can attack or fort, you could build them into either one. With the costs as they are balanced, you could kind of lean into more expensive cards or lower cost. Card draw is a factor there. The more cards you have, the more flexible you can be with the options. I would say typically on a medium hero, I would tend to, I think at a level having the right cards is more important than having the right cost. But there is like a diminishing returns where if your costs are all over the place, you will struggle. So I would say for Spider-Man, you would be, or most medium characters, you can kind of be fairly flexible, but I would lean slightly toward the two cost is the sweet spot. Two cost is important because the double resources can then get double value for those. If you put a two cost card, a two resource card toward a one cost card, you still only got the one cost. So I would say two is a sweet spot. You can't go wrong if you add a two cost card. If you're not sure how your deck's looking, two cost card is kind of the safe bet. So yeah, I'd say two costs are a great foundation. One cost tend to be better than three or four costs, but don't sacrifice your what your deck needs to do just to get the ideal, quote unquote ideal cost curve.
Right. And so let's talk tangible now. So now we're gonna switch over to one of your decks. Welcome to the Web Warriors. And do you want to talk about what you just described in practicality on how you went from Spider-Man's cost curve to kind of the new cost curve here, which looks kind of similar, honestly.
Yeah. A lot of decks. Spider-Man's a great example because although average, he does have some of the more expensive cards. It's a bit. If you see the previous image, the one spiked up pretty high. It's still the highest now. But a lot of the time, you can soften a cost curve. You'll have extremes on one end or the other, and you can kind of just bring that in. That's if you're not sure how you want your costs to look. Smoothing it out is also I should have probably mentioned previously a good option, and that's kind of what's happened here. I would say I've not touched too much on the forecast cards, but the rest of the way, it's the one cost cards have gone up, but not as much dramatically as the 2 and 3 have. Comparatively in percentage.
And so that's just so I am on the same page as you. When you say smoothing the cost curve, you mean trying to turn that into a linear horizontal line?
Yes, you don't have to particularly get it into an exact line. As you'll see this one is it looks like a range of mountains.
Yeah.
But it is flattening it. It doesn't have to be flattened entirely, but it is bringing in the extremes. Yeah.
Okay, bringing in the extremes. So awesome. Is the reason to do that to add flexibility into your deck? And so you're not relying on just drawing into those swinging web kicks. And if you don't have that, what are you going to do with your hand? We've added more one cost so that you have the flexibility. You can figure out what you need to do to manage the minions and the threat before you are able to draw into your swinging web kicks or your 4-cost cards in order to kind of have the high impact on the game at that point.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you kind of nailed it. The first thing you said it's about versatility, about flexibility, about being able to play as many, not necessarily as many cards as possible, spend as many resources as you can. Some cards are more efficient than others. Sometimes, if the threat is going out of control, you'll be wanting to spend your hand on, saving the game. And if you have a card left over, because your only forwarding option is that, it's going to leave you with a card, that's fine. But in general, every resource you spend, you're getting more effect in the game. That's a good thing. So yeah, I would say that roughly covers the majority of the theory I use behind the cost curve. The extreme is if you have a lot of 0 and again the double resources. If you have a lot of 0 and 1 cost cards, you'll start to have too many resources to spend and nothing to spend them on.
Yeah.
It's kind of a balance between being able to spend your resources, but also not having resources left over because the costs you have are clunky, maybe a bit high, and you couldn't play as many as you needed to.
Yeah. So okay. So I think this is a good transition into a different cost curve.
Hmm.
So we have like a lower cost curve or a higher cost curve. Where do we want to focus right now? Do we want to go high or do we want to go low?
Let's
Initially,
go. Let's go for low.
low. So our low cost curve hero is Colossus, one of our newer heroes from the Mutant Genesis box. One of my favorite heroes. I love Colossus. Uh,
I love Colossus.
he is so much fun. I played him, just random side tangent. I played him against Mutagen Formula. He's not a fan of that scenario.
No, that's a lot of. I think there's just so many minions, and the minions when you defeat them, they ping a damage. Yeah,
That
that's
and a
unfortunate.
lot of minions that come in as a boost card that then
Mm.
hit you again. But anyways, okay, so let's talk about Colossus. So his initial deck, this is just his hero signature card, is up on the screen now. Can you talk me through this?
Yeah, again, you're going to see less of a curve, and more of a zigzag, but he has a lot of zero costs and a lot of two costs. He doesn't have a single four cost card. When it averages out, he is on the lower end as opposed to the higher end. A higher cost curve character would tend to have more three and four cost cards, maybe two and three costs. Two is kind of the magic number in the middle.
Two
Um,
two is the magic number. That's my key takeaway so far from the video is two is the
mhm.
magic number. We want to shoot for two. So
Yep.
that's the hero. And then do we want to talk about your solo Colo? How am I
Yeah.
solo
Yeah.
Colo?
Solo Colo. Yep.
Love it.
um, Yep. This deck really has smoothed out the extremes to the extreme. It is almost a perfect line. This was purely by, I wouldn't say by accident, but I didn't aim to have it perfect. It just kind of worked out. I was trying to make a consistent deck, trying to make flexible. This is probably a good point to bring up with Colossus. He as a four hand size hero, he has one less option in hand than a five hand size hero. Spider-Man actually has the ability to draw a card when he's attacked. He's sometimes a six, but Colossus has four. He has less options. So the options you have need to be meaningful, in a general deck building sense, but need to be flexible in a cost curve sense and able to play it more efficiently. I think if anyone's played Hulk, is probably the extreme example. It can be hard to play your whole hand at times.
Right.
Um,
So
so
I guess this is going off script a little bit, so I apologize. But is there a correlation between hand size and cost curve?
yes, yeah, I would say absolutely. I would say for me, the smaller the hand size, the cheaper the cards I want.
You want to
That
skew
is
left.
yes.
Okay.
I would say once you hit the five hand size, I suppose when you've got six or seven, like say Iron Man with all your tech, you can have more expensive cards. But I would say 5 to 7 is a lot closer together than 5 to 4. I think as soon as you go down to 4, it is such a dramatic difference. Um, if you've got 4 cards, one of them's a resource card. There's only 3 possible things you're doing. You have a lot more limited combinations. So in a lower hand size hero, I am looking for more 0, 1, and 2 cost cards, which is why Colossus's kit I think is quite nice. I don't know if we can put it in screen with the magic of editing, but Hulk's cost is like you are climbing a mountain. He has more he has more free cost cards than anything.
Poor Hulk. And the
Yeah,
four hand size and the really poor hand size to accompany that. So
it kind of comes back to what I was saying. More expensive cards, 3, 4, even 5 cost cards, they can be powerful, very impactful, definitely worth playing, but they're a bit more rigid. If Hulk with a 4 hand size plays a 3 cost card, for effective resources, that is his whole turn. So he's only answering one thing, and since his signature kit is made of more 3 costs than anything else, he has a lot. You can only do so much with him
right.
in that regard. Um, uh, so again, if it was a Hulk deck, I would be looking to add a lot of almost exclusively, I would say 2 cost and less cards.
Okay.
Maybe ideally some 0 and 1s.
Yeah. Interesting. just to make sure that you have the flexibility of what you need to be doing in that deck. And also, if you just go click on a random hero, we probably should have said this earlier. If you go click on a random hero as to build a new deck, it will generate the initial cost curve for that hero for you. So
Yeah.
that's a way that you can get that information just on Marvel CDB. But speaking of high cost curve heroes, let's transition now and talk about Rogue. And so Rogue has a fairly high cost signature kit that's going to be on the screen. You want to talk us through what you're seeing and what you're thinking about when you see this cost curve?
Yeah. It's almost it's a little bit. We sort of touched on it a little bit with Hulk. I was talking more about four hand size heroes there, but when the curve starts going up and peaks, more on the upward side, I'm looking to add more lower cost cards. So I say lower hand size, I want cheaper cards. Higher cost curve, I want lower cards. Those are two factors that contribute to that. So for Rogue to make everything fit, one of her key cards, her attack card, the name of it has escaped me, which is unfortunate. Southern
Southern
Cross.
Cross.
Southern Cross. That's a key card for her, but that's going to take most of your hand up when you play it. So I'm looking like, okay, I need to deal with something big damage. I'll play that, but then I need something cheap to play alongside it. And you can kind of smooth it out, or if you add more card draw, you can afford to keep higher costs up because again, you've got that flexibility. But in a general sense, I'm looking to add lower cost cards.
Lower cost cards. So let's talk about now your Sugar We're Going Down swinging deck, which everyone needs to play this deck because it's hilariously fun. So tell me about this. So it maintains. You did add those higher. You added two 4 cost cards into this deck, and so it's a little bit. Oh, it's a vastly different situation than we have with Hulk. But
Yes, yeah.
we added, or you added those 4 cost cards, but you also added in the lower cost cards to help with that flexibility. Talk me through this deck and what you were thinking about when adding those types of costs and smoothing that curve.
Yeah. The forecast on this deck might be slightly misleading, and you can, in some sense, take extremes of this level. Every card in this, every cost in this deck, my 0 cost and 1 cost, there are 7 of each. Of 2 and 3, there are 9 of each. So the forecast with 2 of each is having a lot less impact than it would be if you're looking at just a signature card cost, because
Cool.
of the ratio of cards.
Yeah.
And there are ways in this deck to play those forecasts, specifically say Scarlet Spider for a lower value.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one of the factors. If there's convenient ways to discount a card, you can, treat it as a little bit lower. But in general, it's sort of almost, smooth. It's almost like flattening that line again. If I were to remove the forecasts, and have the signature, just this cost curve with the signature cards on the same screen, it is a lot smoothed down. There's a difference of 2 between the most extreme value on one side and the other when you exclude the 4.
Yeah.
And it's just again to get that versatility.
Yeah. I'll copy and take out those 4 just so we can see that smooth, because it does look very exaggerated with the extreme delta that you have in the number of cards that are in that deck. So it doesn't look smooth, but it is. And this is also something that I think would be interesting to talk about at this point is, and maybe the last thing that we want to talk about in this video before next video where we're talking about resource generators, because I think this could be a good bridge into that, but talking about cards that are not taking the cost curve as necessarily like absolute truth, because of cards like Nick Fury, or cards that your Scarlet Spider you can play with across the Spider-Verse, where you're actually you're probably not paying 4 cost for that card. So when you're looking at this cost curve graph, what are some of the considerations or the modifications that you are considering? Like, it's like, oh, that looks extreme, but is it? I don't even know what question I'm trying to ask, but
I kind of get what you mean. I get what you mean. I would say once you've got a 40 card deck, that's very different to 15. So if you have like just a couple, you don't have to have everything even out. You can have a deck with no 0 cost or 1 0 cost, and it will start to look extreme. But you can it's a little bit like when I was talking about the signature cost curve, that the average is the most important thing. You can even have no free costs and a couple of four costs. You know, you can have it being very jagged. The average is really the takeaway. And I would say that is the general sense. In terms of like special discounts, it's something to be in mind. If you're particularly new to deck building, it's not something I would stress over too heavily. That is something that will come in time. You know, a good example is characters who have a lot of superpower cards, like Colossus and Deft Focus. You know, the first superpower I'm playing most turns is going to be discounted by 1. So again, I can always take his signature kit as being a little bit cheaper than it's actually represented there. I think that's just mostly something that will come with experience.
Okay, excellent. Really informative discussion. Like cost curve is something that I've understood in theory, but it's been really great having you talk through the mechanics and actually like dealing with it. Is there anything else that we want to talk about before we start talking and kind of tease the next video?
You know, there's probably a dozen things, but nothing has come to mind. I think we've hit most of it. I think the lower the hand size, the more careful you have to be with your options. You know, if you have a hand that is just, you know, you draw cards and you have 4 cost cards, you know, you have a problem with that 4 hand size. You're not playing anything.
Yep.
And it's a similar. You can have a 5 hand size and you draw all 3 cost, and you're still only playing one of those. So it is just higher the signature card's cost curve, the more lower cost you're going to try and want to bring in to balance that out. You know, you can even have like a bunch of 3 costs and a bunch of 1 costs, or you know, a mix of 0
Yeah.
and 1s and 3s. That will work fine. It's more about averages. It's about the puzzle and making everything line up in that regard. So I think something I would say is that testing decks is important at any
Mm-hmm.
stage, not just the
Mm-hmm.
cost curve. The most effective way to see if what you've done is effective is to try it out. And if it hasn't worked out for some reason, just iterate on it and give it another go. And you might be surprised what works.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you so very much. I'm excited to talk about our next topic, which is going to come out in insert date here, a couple weeks or however however long. But it's going to be talking about resources and resource generators and how that affects the cost curve and what the cost actual practicality of, do I need to be adding more resources? Do I need to be adding more resource generators? And taking the discussion that we had today, looking at that cost curve and how and tying that into actually putting in those specific types of cards in the deck. Anything else you want to add to that, villain?
What can I say that will not be too in depth? I don't think I am. I think I'm going to leave that there.
Okay.
You know, there's definitely an impact on what resources you want to use, and I will say you can start. You can sometimes start with resources. You can be like, my hero doesn't have a lot of resource generators. I want to use the double resources. What do I need to make that happen? Or it can be vice versa. Like, I've got these costs, I need to pay for them, and that's going to have quite an interesting impact.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for that. If you want to make sure you do not miss that video, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and that will be out. It'll come out whenever. But villain, it was great talking with you about cost curves. Can you tell everyone one more time where they can find you? And I will make sure that all your links, all of the decks that we talked about as well, will be linked down below in the video description.
Yep, I make decks. The best place to see that is Marvel CDB. If you specifically want to find me, the easiest way will probably be to use the link here, but you can search decks by my name, VillainTheory. It's exactly the same as you'll see here on the website.
Excellent. Well, thanks for having on, or thanks for coming on, and I look forward to talking to you next time about resources. See ya.
Me too. See ya.